Welcome, everyone. This is a webinar about the loss of Crowdtangle and how people are adapting and how we're adapting, and a tool that we're offering for adapting. For background, for folks who don't know, Crowdtangle was the tool that Meta provided for researchers and civil society to be able to analyze and monitor things on social media, on Facebook and Instagram. And that was decommissioned in August. And everyone knew it was coming, it was announced, but there was a lot of advocacy to try to stop it from happening. And there was still a sense of maybe it wouldn't, but it did. And it's now like completely gone. And that has left a lot of people who relied on that for their monitoring of mis and disinformation, for research that they were doing, especially in the peace building conflict space, left them without a tool to do that. And so that's what we are talking about here. We'd love to hear from you, how you're adapting. We'll share how we're adapting. And this is hopefully a generative space, and that we can all be really generous with our own strategies and how we're moving forward with this. So the format of this webinar will be that we will start with allowing you to sort of come in and come online. If you have a way that you are, sorry, let me repeat that. Well, we'll ask you both how you were using Crowdtangle and how you are adapting now. And you'll have the opportunity to come online and share that with the group, or you can put it in the chat. So those are both options. So we'll have a discussion all amongst ourselves about that. And then Elena is going to show our tool that we are providing as an alternative called Phoenix, and do a demo around that. And then we'll have some further discussion afterwards and time for Q&A there at the end. So that is the format. This meeting is recorded, so please just let us know if you come online, or nothing from the chat. The chat would be shared out, but if you have any sensitivity around that recording. All right, I think that's it. Anything else, Elena, before we get started? No. Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this is the prompt, people. Were you using Crowdtangle before it was shut down? And how are you adapting now? And your answer could be that we don't have a solution, but how are you adapting now? And you can raise your hand, and then I can have you come online and you can share, you can come on to the webinar and share, or you can put this in the chat. So we'll just give a minute for that prompt to sit and for people to think if they want to come on.
And maybe while people do that, we can also introduce ourselves, because I just realized we assume, since we're organizing it, that people know who we are.
Thank you.
So yes. My name is Elena, and I'm one of the co-founders and the strategy lead at Build Up.
Amazing. And I'm Julie, and I'm a peace building and research lead at Build Up. And Build Up as an organization has been doing social media monitoring for a number of years in lots of different varieties. And we focus broadly on what we call using new tools for old problems and old tools for new problems, which is essentially that we apply a digital first focused peace building in various places, and on sort of for online conflict and offline conflict, and the ways that those interact with each other. Sorry, I forgot to introduce ourselves. Okay, does anyone want to come online with how they were using it and what they're doing now? Yeah, okay, great. Crystal, you are coming online.
Hi, I just wanted to take place. No, I'm kidding. I just want to have my voice heard. So thank you for organizing this session, and honestly, from the entire ecosystem that I'm familiar with, Build Up is the one doing the most work on alternatives to Crowdtangle. So I'm really happy to be on this call. With everything happening in the background, I hope you understand how much it means to me to be on this call. So I was using Crowdtangle with Build Up, as you know, but just to share with everyone, so to identify pages that are pushing for polarization, to identify specific narratives that are happening online on different platforms. Mostly Facebook, from the work I was doing. I just wanted to say that whether it would have stayed Crowdtangle or not, I'm happy to see that it's no longer here, and it's people like you who are giving an alternative with all the censorship and everything we know about like data and privacy and so on. It's actually a huge thing, yani, that it's people like us who are doing the work and not Crowdtangle. And the ways to adapt it, honestly, from where I'm coming, so the causes that I'm part of that are not necessarily peace building, obviously they intersect, but it's more women's issues, conflict and post-conflict and so on. So it's not terminology wise, it's not peace building. We don't really use these tools, and I think Crowdtangle was very distant from users in terms of access, how you log in, how you get the like the different way, I forgot them, but I would say API and stuff like this that are not familiar for the actual peace builders on the ground. So I'm not sure if people knew that there was this tool, and just in the way we're adapting or in the way build up is providing an alternative. I just want to say this is something that I think will change also the landscape when you are able to develop a tool that is more accessible and more friendly and more easier to use and non-conditional and so on. So I just wanted to say congratulations, and I'm very happy to hear more about it. And bye, Crowdtangle.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Chris. I didn't take that into account that there could be a good riddance, and so I'm really glad that you brought that in. All right, Cooper, we're going to bring you up next. Cooper Gatewood. And yeah, if you haven't already, do you want to start by just introducing yourself, actually?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm Cooper Gatewood. I'm a senior research manager at BBC Media Action. We do a lot of media development and media for development, and we work primarily in lower income countries. I joined Media Action last year, but I had been using Crowdtangle in my previous role as well. So I've been using Crowdtangle for 5 or 6 years. So I was sad to see it go, but I also share some of Crystal's frustrations with the platform. It was not always the most reliable, so I could definitely also say good riddance to that. But in terms of how we were using Crowdtangle in our work at BBC Media Action, we put out a lot of content on Facebook, obviously, to reach our audiences. So we were using Crowdtangle in some ways to evaluate the contents that we were putting out. But recently, we've been pivoting a lot to a focus on mis and disinformation in the markets where we work. So we have been using Crowdtangle to look at some of the trending topics in the different countries and try to get a handle on the types of mis and disinformation that we're circulating there. So obviously, and also it's worth mentioning that a lot of the markets where we work, Facebook is the main social media platform.
Right.
So with Crowdtangle gone, we are missing a lot of visibility over the issues that we sort of really want to be focusing on. In terms of a pivot, at the moment, we have been using other social listening tools that mainly just have access to other platforms. So the main one that we've been working with is Brandwatch, which obviously has very limited access to Meta-owned platforms, but we're sort of hoping that, looking at other platforms will give at least a sense of what's circulating more broadly online. We're also preparing an application for Meta's content library to see if we're able to gain access as an independent charity. I know that the application at the moment for the content library is, or it had been geared primarily for academics, but they've opened it a bit more for charities and NGOs to apply. But I've heard that the application process and the rejection or approval is very opaque. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, so I'm very interested in hearing more about the tool that BuildUp has developed and what types of access it might provide. But yeah, thanks so much for organizing.
Awesome. Thank you, Cooper. That's great. And I put some of those in the chat if people needed a written form of those additional tools. All right, Giovanna, you're up next. And thank you, Cooper.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think I can share some insights as well First of all, thank you so much for organizing this event. I think for us doing research, things can seem quite isolating. So all of those moments where we can come together and think about solutions, they are fantastic. I started using Crowdtangle before it was bought by Facebook at the time as a journalist. And I remember it being a tool that I'm from Brazil, and at the time, the Association of Investigative Journalists got a contract with Crowdtangle to allow all associates to use the tool, and it was a shift in doing social media investigations, because that was also the very beginning. I think that was maybe 2014, 2015, something around there. So social media listening was made so much more easily through Crowdtangle, and the application to also incorporate other forms of social media, like Twitter, for example, was also working it was still in development, but was working quite well. It was dramatic, the amount of lack of investment and this discontinuation that happened over the years. It was just it was coming gradually until it was fully discontinued. So it was quite sad in the past few years to see that the potential inside of Crowdtangle was being quite lost. And even for us, as a transition from journalism to more platform research, our organization Global Voices is part of Meta's Trusted Partner channel. And even if we had specific requests and suggestions, those would just not be heard by the platform. We use it a lot for our researchers because it is very interface friendly. It's user friendly. It's easy to get around. And a lot of times when you're building an application like this, or you're doing it for yourself, this type of data collection for yourself, it's so difficult to go around understanding what's really going on inside of the platforms or do it for yourself. So it was a big aid. And a lot of what we were doing was narrative collection. So we also made it easy for us to understand and categorize different narratives coming from comments, coming from reactions. And the thing about Meta's content library is that we deal with a lot of very, very sensitive pieces of data, and our researchers are coming from backgrounds that are very marginalized. So we're talking about doing research inside of meta ecosystems and communities that are very, very, we cannot expose those researchers. And Meta's content library requires us to send to have a very specific account of every single user from our organization doing research there. This is not something that we can commit to because we need to protect those names. We cannot commit to a third-party organization or even a university having access to those names. That's too much risk for us. So it just became inaccessible. So when we are thinking about an alternative to Crowdtangle, it has to be something that allows us to do this research freely, to be able to consult those pieces of information in a dynamic way, but also in a way that allows for people to know that they're not going to be exposed if there's a data leak, for example. And before with Crowdtangle, we could just have a general observatory account that they could use and filter and create their own filters inside of that, which is not possible anymore. So yeah, I think I'm going to stop here and also allow other people to speak. But thank you so much for your effort and for organizing this.
Amazing. Thank you, Giovanna, to kind of give the history as well, because it is part of a larger trend of the privatization of data and then platforms kind of cutting this off for researchers and civil society. So it's nice to have that history that it actually did start with much more potential than it ended up with. All right, I'm just calling attention to two more that came in the chat. Prihesh said they used it for the last 5 years and now looking at mostly manual and scraping. And asking for people who are using TikTok's API that maybe we can share that. I know when you're sharing as well. And then also Jonathan Cruz, who was using it in Sri Lanka. So those are in the chat if you want to look there. I think at this point, we'll now move to how we're adapting, like both how we will have the same prompt, how we use Crowdtangle, and then how we're adapting. And then we'll have a moment again at the end of that to have more discussion about that. All right, so over to you, Elena, when you're ready.
Okay, great. Thank you, and thanks everybody who shared what they were doing and how they were adapting. And just interesting to see a lot of people kind of facing some of the same issues that we're facing in terms of the gatekeeping. I saw Cooper's comment about the sort of the requirements for access to the content library. I think for some of us on this call, we may be able to get through those requirements. I think I spotted a couple of organizations on here that already have access. But certainly for a lot of the people that we work with, getting access to the meta content library, or for that matter, to the TikTok API, which right now focuses only on research institutions, although they are thinking of opening it up to other organizations, is quite challenging. So particularly for local NGOs, we know that can be impossible. Anyway, that's just a reflection on that. So we've been using Crowdtangle for a number of years now. For things that are very similar to what some of you shared. Our focus is much more on identifying narratives that are polarizing or actors that are polarizing, and then using that information to find strategies, peace-building strategies primarily, whether offline or online, to address those narratives. So what I don't want to do is go through all of the projects. So I just selected 3 to just highlight, to give you a sense of the kind of things that we were doing with Crowdtangle while it was around. So one of them is a program that we worked on. Actually, Christelle, who came on the mic earlier, was working on this program as well, called Digital Maps. It was a program that worked across a number of countries in the Middle East and North Africa, with local civil society organizations in those countries. And what we were doing is essentially working with these organizations to find specific aspects of polarization on social media. And we were looking at YouTube, at Twitter, and at Facebook. And at that time, we had access to all 3 APIs, which seems like dreamland right now. And so what we were looking at is essentially what were the narratives that were showing the most polarization, and then what were the networks of the actors. And then working with the civil society organizations to find interventions that they could do, narrative interventions on the social media platforms directly, that would address some of those of the polarization dynamics that we found. So that's one example. Another one is our colleague Caleb, during the Kenyan elections, wrote essentially a series of reports that analyzed online discourse, and specifically monitored hate speech in Kenya, focusing on conversations around the general election in August of 2022, and looking almost exclusively at Facebook. And so again, this was done using a lot of the Crowdtangle tools. And then finally, more recently, our colleague Claudia, who I think is also on this call, has been working with a number of other actors and partners on looking at how racist discourse shows up on Instagram in the Netherlands, and particularly examining how it shows up in the comment sections of Instagram posts, and what kind of dog whistles are most common, and how they intersect with the topics that are posted about on Instagram. And again, using that as a way of informing a peace-building intervention. So we just wanted to kind of give you those examples. Oh, I just realized that I meant to share as I was talking, but I didn't do that, what these different reports look like. So let me just show you now. So, oh, hang on, just having an issue with my share screen. There we go. So this is the report on the Netherlands that I mentioned. This is the one about Kenya and the social media analytics around the election. And then finally, this is the one that I mentioned on across a number of countries in the Middle East and North Africa, that looked at several social media platforms. Julie's going to put the link to where you can see these reports and others, just to get a sense of what we were doing. But I think the main kind of thing to take away from this is that we were using Crowdtangle primarily to do the part of this work that was about gathering data from Facebook or from Instagram. And so, here we go. And so when we started thinking about what else we needed to do to get to the kind of analysis that we were looking to do, we thought, well, you know, one part of what we have to do is to gather this data, but then we also need to add a set of classifications to it to allow us to identify trends, and then we need to visualize it. So some of you will know that you can do some of that or those things in Crowdtangle, but often you end up using other things to kind of export the data and use it elsewhere. So we were using the Crowdtangle API to gather the data, and then we built this set of tools that we called Phoenix that essentially helped us to classify both the text and the authors that we were gathering data about, and then to visualize that data in different ways. And that's what the output was in the reports that we're showing. Phoenix was for a while a set of code of tools that written in code that we ran on our laptops, that we ran locally on our computers. And so we would plug in the Crowdtangle API, and then we were able to sort of do different search parameters, get the data, then use other tools to classify it, and then visualize it in some kind of a dashboard. And while that was very useful for us internally, what we were increasingly finding is that we made that code open source for other people to use, but what we were increasingly finding is a lot of people who work in our field don't really want to run code on their computers, or don't have the skills to do that. And so about a year ago, we decided to try to turn this into still an open source, but this time a user-friendly platform that will live online and that will conduct these 3 tasks: gather, classify, and visualize social media data. And we'll do it thinking primarily about the user journey of peace builders and mediators. I know some of you here aren't peace builders and mediators, but the reason we say that is that a lot of the functionality that we've built is thinking about that. So for example, I think it was Cooper, when you talked about monitoring your own content, that isn't what it's primed for. It's actually primed for finding particular types of discourse. So more useful for people who are looking at hate speech or polarization or maybe misinformation, just to give some examples. So as we started to build that, what we realized is that for this gather component, we had a choice. We could either build it so that it was pulling from an API, so from the Crowdtangle API or the YouTube API or the TikTok API, and then ask that people put in their own API keys. Or as we were starting to see that more and more people, more and more organizations were restricting access to their APIs or making it very expensive, we could build it based on scrapers. And so I saw Prahesh had a comment in there that basically said, I don't know, or not sure that can be done ethically. We think it can be done ethically, and I can get into that later. And that's actually what we've done in the end. So the gather component of Phoenix is built essentially on a bunch of scrapers. And so what I want to do now, so this is the manual that we've put together, and which is already linked on our website. So you can start having a look at it, although it has a lot of sections that say coming soon, because we haven't quite finished writing up how everything works. But what I want to do now is essentially show you what Phoenix does. So this is the Phoenix console. This is mine, so I have some projects already. But if you were coming on here for the first time, then you would start off by creating a project. By the way, I was saying before that I was terrified that people would show up to this and it would break, but it doesn't seem to be breaking. So I would create a project, I would give it a name. I'm calling it Test for Webinar. Here's one thing that is interesting in terms of, I think it was Giovanna who was talking about the ethical concerns. So one of the things that we thought was very important is if we are going to use scrapers, then we need to make sure that the way that we're working is compliant. So we went through a whole GDPR compliance process, and in essence have come up with a policy whereby we differentiate between personal information and all other data, and we give a date at which both will be deleted. And this is something which the user can set. There is a maximum to how far the user can set it, but then it can also be in conversation with us. So then that's set here. And then I'm just going to say it's one-off analysis, and then I can give it a description, which I'm not going to say now. And so this will create a project. Hopefully this is not where it crashes.
Just to say while it's thinking that the reason that there's fear about it crashing is that this is definitely like the launch for Phoenix is meant to be in December, January. And so this is very much an early look at the tool.
Great, but it didn't crash. So it's an early successful look at the tool. So then I would go into my new project. And so one of the things that we realize is that people kind of think, oh, I have a tool for social media listening means I can do social media listening. But our experience is that if you don't have a process around it, then it can get really messy. So that's why we've got this little checklist here, which doesn't do anything. You can check it on and off. It's kind of for you to follow. That links to the manual, right? So this kind of define a problem statement is here as well. So this is like, okay, these are some questions that you need to think about, you know, if you're going to decide what you want to do. And so it kind of talks you through the process as well as giving you the tool. So then it says, define where you will get data from. Again, you can see in the Phoenix manual, it'll talk you through different ways of thinking about what platforms, how are you going to search, etc. And then when it says to gather data from social media, it says, okay, go to gather. And gather is here. And so you go to gather. And then it again tells you, if you don't know what you're doing, go to the manual. And then it says, okay, what type of gather would you like to do? Now, at the moment, these are the gathers that we have available. By the time that we launch, so right now you can essentially gather posts from Facebook based on a list of accounts and comments on Facebook based on a list of posts. And then you can see what you can do with TikTok. I'm not going to go through it. We will soon be releasing posts from Facebook based on a list of keywords. So that will be possible soon. And then we'll be building on this. So we're hoping to add Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram in that order. And then possibly other things later on. Somebody said earlier that one of the things that was kind of annoying, and I agree about Crowdtangle, is they didn't really listen to users. Our hope is to do the complete opposite. So this has been developed in partnership with a number of peace building and mediation organizations. And our hope is to continue to do that, so to continue to take suggestions as much as we can. So anyway, I'm going to just do one. So I'm doing a Facebook post gather just because it's easy. And again, I'm going to call it test for webinar Facebook. And so I'm going to say, okay, I want posts that were created since last Friday, let's say. And I can also say, you know, I don't want too many posts. And right now I'm just going to set 10 simply because I don't want this to run for very long. And then all I need to do is I need to paste here the Facebook accounts from which I want to gather posts. So you could have made a list of Facebook accounts somewhere else and you just copy and paste it in. As long as they're separated in the way that it's asking for. I'm actually just going to do one. So I'm just the build up Facebook page. So I'm just pasting it there and then I tell it to save. So as soon as I say save, it's going to move it into here. So here we go. Okay. And so now it's saying, okay, here's your gather. If I'm like, wait, what did I put in there? I can go in there and I can see, okay, this is what parameters I gave it, and here's the input values, so what I actually was asking it to do. And then once I'm satisfied, I can ask it to run. I'm going to talk about the estimated cost later, but once, you know, I sort of look at this and I say, you know, are you sure you want to run this gather? Yes, I'm sure I want to run this gather. And so I tell it to run the gather. So while it does that, while it's running the gather, because it's going to take a minute because it's actually going to be doing it, what I want to do is show you one where I've already run a gather so that you can see what it looks like in the end. So this is actually a project we're doing right now with a number of partners across the Sahel. And in this case, we're running lots of gathers. So you can see that these are all gathers that have been completed, where we've been gathering lots of different kinds of data with different parameters, etc. And once this data has been gathered, we can then classify it. Now, this classify says coming soon because the user interface for it hasn't been built yet, but the backend does exist. And so what the classify allows us to do is two things. It allows us to classify the text in the posts and the comments according to a set of features, so a set of keywords or phrases. So that means that if I want to classify posts that say are about food, then I can classify anything that says pizza, or burger as food, for example. So it can do that kind of classification. And it can classify the accounts. So I can say, I can get a list of all the accounts that I have gathered from, and I can give them a label. So I can label them as something that is useful to me, be academics, journalists, activists, whatever it is that's useful to me. Once that user interface is available here, that will all be done here. And so once you finish with the visualization, with the classification, it then says, okay, so now let's visualize it in a dashboard. So at the moment, if I were to just run the gather, as I just did in the test one, as soon as it's completed successfully, I don't have to do a classification. I can go straight to the visualization. And so then if I click on go to dashboard, it's going to take me to a dashboard that basically shows me the basic data. When I first create a project, the only thing it's going to show me is what you're seeing right now on the screen. So these ones here. This has been translated into French because of the nature of this project, but it wouldn't be normally. And so it'll just be the number of posts, the number of comments, and then comments per day. But this dashboard is one where we've already done a lot of work. So we've already essentially created lots of additions. So I wanted to show you what is possible with this. So on this one in particular, because it has a classification, a text classification, that text classification is for topics or TEM. And so I can see, how many posts for each topic, how many comments for each topic, how many likes for each topic. I can also filter this by a number of different parameters. So both which platform. So this one has both Facebook and TikTok. So I can say, okay, actually just show me Facebook, don't show me TikTok. But then also all the other different things. So the type of actor, the post theme. I'll get to the intimidation in a second, what country it's from, and the date. Actors, as I said, we can do a classification of actors as well. So here, this is just the top 10 actors, but then this is like the type of actor, and this is a classification that we've created for the different types of actors. And then that also means, of course, that I can say, okay, now show me for the type of actor and their topic, what is the sort of the cross between those two variables. I wanted to also show you this one because it's something quite particular. So one thing that we are moving towards, I said that right now we can do classifications by features, by actors, but what we're moving towards is also integrating the ability to use more complex models for classifying text. At the beginning, that will mean that we will integrate Perspective API, for those of you who know it, which comes from which is something that Google Jigsaw developed. It's a classifier they developed. But we also have the capacity of building models in-house and applying those to the data. And so that's what we did here. So we did we built a model that basically looked at how intimidating comments were. And so that's applied to all the comments. And so what that means is that we can, for example, have a look at the topics of the posts and the level of intimidation of the comments underneath. And so that gives kind of a good sense of where intimidation, what topics are garnering the most intimidation, just to give a sense of it as well. Yeah, and then this, obviously we get all the data about things like shares and likes, etc., for the different platforms. So you can sort of look at, okay, I want to look at, let's say, cyber criminality. On Facebook, can you find me what are the posts with the most shares and likes, and it'll show it up in a table. I think that's a good overview of how it goes. So just to kind of repeat again, what we're trying to provide is both some process tools. So how would you actually go about doing this, particularly if you're in peace building and mediation? Then a set of gather tools. This in many ways is the thing that replaces Crowdtangle the most effectively, in the sense that because we're using scrapers, we can get Facebook and Instagram data, some classification tools, and then the visualization tools that I showed. The last thing I wanted to say, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Okay, I can always go back to it if there are questions, but the last thing I wanted to say is that yeah, I really like, I think it was Joanna who was sharing the the journey of Crowdtangle, like the promise of it at the beginning and how excited we all were that we were going to be able to use this tool. And I hope we're not sounding too much like that. I think there is one very clear difference, which is that we are not a commercial enterprise. In fact, we are very explicitly not a commercial enterprise. We're setting Phoenix up as a digital public good, which means that our funding model will be tied to fundraising, and it will be free at the point of access always. So when I clicked create on the gather, no, run, sorry, on the gather, and it gave me this window, and I said, this is how much it's going to cost, and it showed zeros. Eventually, what we will do is we will assign credits to anyone using Phoenix. So you will have a certain number of scraping credits, and the amount of scraping credits that you have will depend on how much we have fundraised that year, which we will split equally across all projects. So maybe you will have 1,000 fundraising credits, 1,000 scraping credits, and then that's how much data you will be able to scrape. So that's kind of our way of trying to keep this free, but also accounting for the fact that there is a cost to scraping data. Yeah, I'm going to stop there. Is that, Julie, do you think I've missed anything? Is that okay?
There's a couple technical questions that came in just in the chat. And so maybe if you could address those, and then an invite to anyone else, if you have questions, do you want to put them in the Q&A? And that way we could definitely catch up, because sometimes the chat moves a little too quickly. So a call for additional questions, and then if you want to address these two while I set up the next.
So which ones am I addressing? The ones that, sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat. Is it the
Yeah,
ones
sorry, yeah. That's what that's the use of the Q&A function. So there's a question from Odanga, says, how far back does it go, like data that you can scrape? And then does it measure post interactions like the intelligence section that Crowdtangle had? And finally, is there a maximum level of posts that you can collect?
Yeah, okay. We don't think there's a limit to how far back we can go on any of these. I think maybe there's one or two scrapers that do have a limit, but ones we've got in right now. It doesn't provide so post interaction was kind of a composite measure of likes, shares, and something else that I can't remember on Crowdtangle. So we don't get that measure because that's not available from scraping. So you can look at likes and shares and whatever other things we are able to gather from directly from scraping. I personally find that quite useful, actually, possibly even more useful than the interaction measure, which we weren't entirely sure how it's constituted always. Also, one thing that we've done, which isn't specific, I guess, to Crowdtangle, but is that we have standardized across different platforms so that you can compare across them. So we've called a like, so this is defined in the manual, but we've called a like the same thing in all the different platforms so that you can compare Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, for example. Even though they don't internally call it likes, they're essentially the same function, so that allows you to compare. And there's the maximum level of posts that you can collect will depend on how many scraping credits we can assign to each person. That's it. So the more we fundraise, the more that you will be able to collect, in essence.
Then Kate asked, does Phoenix have an API? Can the results be exported?
We haven't got an API right now, no. That's an interesting suggestion. Maybe we should think about that. And can the results be exported? No, because you can export the analysis results. So you can export the graphs that you make, but you can't export the raw data for the GDPR reasons that we gave earlier, which is that we're holding them and then we're deleting the personal information. Otherwise, we wouldn't be GDPR compliant. I also saw somebody who said, how affordable will Phoenix be? So I just want to repeat that it's free. And the way we're managing that is that it will be by application. So you will have to apply for an account, and then we will approve your account. And the reason for that is that because we're keeping it free, we also have to be just conscious of how many people we're letting out so we don't run out of money.
On that point specifically, Benjamin asks, if we run out of credits, is it possible to buy scraping credits?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do you think we should scraping credits? Can I turn it back on you? So we think maybe yes, that would probably make sense. But we sort of have this like ethical question about whether we should make you buy scraping credits from other people as well while you're at it. Yeah, can I just put can we put a note on that because we haven't quite figured it out yet is the answer.
Yeah. And would love your opinion. So if you have one, yeah, put it in the chat. Or
Yeah, exactly. Tell us what you think. Okay, wait, hang on. Kate has lots of questions, so I'm just gonna keep going.
Yeah.
How do we apply? There will be a form on our website on December 1st. In the meantime, Julie's gonna give you a link to sign up to a newsletter. What about languages with Phoenix? Mukhtar, if you mean the console itself, so I didn't show that. I don't know why I didn't show that. But the console is already, actually I could just show it now. Sorry. I'll just do it. So the console, the language of the actual console, like that's already available in 4 different languages. So in Spanish, English, French, and Arabic. So you would be able to see the console in those languages. We can do others, we just haven't done it yet. So I think if there's a demand, then we will do it. In terms of the language of what you collect, it's whatever you want to collect in. So Mukhtar, I'm assuming you would want to collect in Somali, and so you would be able to collect language in Somali. And any classification you build, you're building yourself, so you can build it in whatever language you want. Am I missing more stuff?
Yes, we have a question from Jan that says if we run our own instance on a VPS, then the credits won't matter.
Where are we? Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. Yeah, and we ended up all in the chat, so we have to scroll up a little bit. So it is,
Okay.
let's see, about 10 questions up, and then also curious to know how the scrapers are working. So these are kind of 2 technical.
Yeah. So if you, the code is open source. So if you want to run your, if you want to take the code and do your thing, then please take the code and do your thing. So I guess all the answers I'm providing is for the instance that we are hosting. I should have said that from the start. So absolutely, you can take the code and do your thing. I don't know how to answer that question about the scrapers. Because actually, I think it depends on which ones are the scrapers. Sorry, so the question is curious to know how the scrapers are working. Are they based on headless browsers? They are all coming from Apify at the moment. We may in the future look at other scrapers, but that's where so we'd have to look at the documentation for each of those. Again, I think my guess, Jan, is that you have more technical knowledge than most people on this call. So I would encourage you to look at on our website, which Julie will share in a minute. Yeah. There's a link to GitHub, and you can look at the code yourself.
We have just a bit of chatter happening about like the question we threw back out about credit buying. Yeah, and I wonder if I could just invite Benjamin, you or others to send us an email, and that's something that we could continue because it's a conversation that we're really interested in. Yeah, and how it could work. Okay, Charles has a question. If raw data were to be required by a research process, can Phoenix make the data available officially?
Do you mean available or downloadable? And I think if you mean downloadable, we'd have to set up a process for that. We don't, like right now, that's not, so we're not prioritizing. Okay, so Charles, I think the real answer is we're not prioritizing researchers who would have the capacity to make that kind of request in an official capacity, because we're mainly thinking about NGOs that don't otherwise have access to this kind of data. So maybe we'll think about that down the line, but right now it's not our top priority.
But I could see space open for that, for if there is an IRB established, like so just it's well taken that will be in the conversation.
Yeah. Kate just asked for the link to the code. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link to the website, and then you can keep talking, Julie.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Okay, so if you still have more questions, you want to keep talking in the chat, that's cool. We have some questions for you, just 2 of them. So if I could ask you a favor. which is to go to menti.com. And then I'm going to give you a participation link for a short survey. So if you go to menti.com, that link is in the chat. It asks you to put in a survey code. That is this 5836-2075. And we have two questions, essentially, with what you have seen in the short intro to what Phoenix is. To what extent do you think it could replace the functionality that Crowdtangle had for you before? Like, is it filling your gaps? And it's also okay if you don't know, you could put that as well. Yeah, great, we're seeing some things come in. And then in just a moment, I'll move us to the next slide, which asks, I'll post the code. Yep. Here's the code for the survey. 5836-2075. It's also at the top of my screen, if you can see that. Right, that gives us a minute as other people are joining. Okay, if you're still on that page, that's okay. But if you've already voted and you're ready to move on, we would also like to ask you what is missing for it to fully fill the gap. And this is an open-ended, so feel free to be as brief or as extensive as you want here. These are great. Thank you so much already.
So it's interesting. We were actually talking the other day about Telegram and whether that could be added. There's a really great group of people who have made actually a tool for Telegram. It's currently not a web-based tool. It's one that you host on your own laptop. It's called Television. So yeah, if anybody's interested about that, I can also share details later. It's funny that there's quite a few talking about Telegram.
Yeah.
I also really appreciate the questions and but what are the criteria exactly for the application process. I think we need to put more information out about that, truly.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are useful. What you're seeing now is I just grouped some of the responses. So yeah, it looks like, we're seeing themes come up in terms of more platforms, platform diversity, skills for use. Yeah. Okay. Great. I'll just give it another minute for people who are still making responses. Just to reiterate again, the entire development of Phoenix of the platform has been done in consultation, kind of like the whole way through, in partnership, in use. And so this is another form of that. And so thanks for the generosity of sharing your thoughts and opinions and how it would work or how it wouldn't work, because yeah, ideally it's really responsive to as many needs as it can fill. Okay. All right. With that, looks like we've got some good things in here. Thank you again for doing that. I wonder if there are any final questions that either we haven't addressed because we missed it in the chat, or you've just thought of it now and you want to put in before we close out the webinar. Any final questions? Okay, I'm now going to put a couple of links in the chat. The first is I'm putting our email, because some of the conversations that were started, we'd love to continue having. So please feel free to reach out to us. For the recording, that is team@howibuildup.org. And you can direct her what it's about. And then I put in the link to the Phoenix page that hosts the code and other things if you want to go look more in depth there. But as we had mentioned earlier, Phoenix is very much in a pre-launch state, and it's slotted to kind of come out officially at the end of the year. And so if you sign up to our newsletter here, you'll be kind of the first to know about that. And so the link there in the chat is to sign up to our newsletter, in which you'll, yeah, get the news when it's ready or other developments that happen alongside of it. Okay, anything else, Elena, or final words from you or anyone else? No. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for joining. This was a really interesting, exciting session, I thought. Okay, bye
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.